Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everyone, I am really delighted to introduce today's guest, Niven Postma. Niven has held executive positions since she was 29 in a career that has spanned multiple sectors and roles, including CEO of the Businesswomen's Association, head of the South African Reserve Bank Academy, and head of leadership and culture for the Standard Bank Group, the largest bank by assets in Africa. Having started her career as a strategy consultant, she now works with global executive teams to build what she calls whole system leadership, and so doing fundamentally transforms how they are able to work together and what they are able to achieve. Niven is the author of If You Don't Do Politics, Politics Will Do You. Ooh, I love that. She's also a contributor to Harvard Business Review and a part-time tutor at Cambridge University's Institute for Sustainability Leadership and a guest lecturer at Stanford University and the London Business School. She is an expert facilitator on women's leadership development programs around the world and is currently enrolled for her PhD in organizational behavior, seeking to understand whether organizational politics are different for women. Well, that's a great question to be answering. I would probably say yes. Yeah, you don't need the PhD now.
Oh, thanks so much for the last 3 years of my life.
All right. Anyway, please join me in welcoming Niven Postma. And thank you for joining us from your home office in South Africa. Where specifically? I know you've told me where you are in South Africa, but
in Johannesburg.
Johannesburg. So thank you for joining us. And tell us, Niven, we love to start at the beginning and talk about those formative years and how they may or may not have informed where you are today. So take us back there.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's my pleasure to be here. So thank you for reaching out and asking me. Look, I think one of my favorite stories, and every time we get together with an old family friend who knew my parents from high school, she looks at me and she tells the same story. And she's, like I say, been telling it my whole life. I was about 18 months old and her name was Auntie Rena. Well, it still is. And she in the block of flats across the road from the block of flats that my very young parents were living in at the time. I mean, my mother was 19 when she had me and my dad was 21. And I forget the details from my mother's side, but the point is I pitched up at tiny knee-high tot knocking on Auntie Rena's door, and she looked down at me standing at her front door, looked around for my mother, and my mother was nowhere to be seen. And Irina was, what are you doing here? What is going on? And I just looked at her and I said, no, I decided I wanted to come visit you. So I walked out of the house out of the door of our flat, down the passage, down the stairs, across the parking lot, across the road, up the stairs, up to her passage, and knocked on her door. And like I say, let's give a little bit of leeway for how young I was, but they say I was younger than 2. Wow. We left that flat when I was 3. So the point is I wasn't older than 3.
Right.
And I just love that story. It makes me beam every time I think of this little kid deciding to go visit Auntie Rena and really didn't need any help doing that. And off she went to do it. And I suppose maybe that is indicative of pretty much what I've wanted to do and managed to do for most of my life and career. That beautiful saying, I forget who it's from, don't go where the path may lead, go where there is no path and leave a trail. And certainly in that case, I was following the path that my mom took to get us to Auntie Rena, but I was doing it by myself because I felt like it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, what a great story. And it has so much applicability to so many things, right?
Yeah, I think a sense of adventure and excitement and agency, and that I will figure things out, and that the world is an interesting place. And if I want to do something, then best I do it.
And I'm sure after that, your parents probably changed all the locks on the doors.
Actually, now that you mention it, that may have been why we moved to a house with a wall and a gate that I couldn't reach.
Now, I'm curious, did you grow up in Johannesburg or
I did.
Yeah. Oh, so you're really in your hometown, so to speak.
I didn't finish high school, as I did primary school in Johannesburg, but high school in another city. And then when I came back to South Africa, Johannesburg was very much where I chose to be. And, people who know South Africa or live in South Africa, Joburg, it's a crazy place. And it is. Yeah. But as with all of my choices, I suppose, all the choices that are within my control at any rate, it was an informed choice. It was a conscious choice. I want to be in South Africa. I want to be in Joburg.
And so then from there, when you were about 3, you moved somewhere else. Were you still in Joburg, as you called it?
Yeah. Joburg.
Joburg. Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to get with the lingo. So, you moved somewhere else within Joburg, but by high school you were living somewhere else.
Yes.
Take us through some of those years and how you navigated your younger life.
Yeah, well, we moved quite a lot when I was younger. I mean, not by some people's standards, but certainly by other people's standards.
Yeah.
And I remember being so envious, and actually every so often still having that twinge of envy when you watch a movie, often American movies, and the parents have kept the kids' room pristine and there's stuff in the attic where they can go look at all the old paperwork. I thought, oh man, that looks so reassuring, and that looks so homey. And, the departed child's bedroom is not quite a shrine, but it kind of is. And certainly we never had that. And the downside, I suppose, is that sense of permanence. But the upsides, especially now that I look at it as I'm older, was a sense of, okay, well, now this is where you are now. So make friends here, figure yourself out here, and get on with it. And of course, for kids, that can sometimes be easier said than done.
Yes.
But I mean, essentially, in the end, it wasn't. I mean, there were some times of loneliness, but mostly, like I say, I kind of got on with it.
Yeah, it sounds like it doesn't sound like you're reflecting on these moves as always being I was always the new kid or always on the outside looking in. But what you're saying is there were times it was an adjustment, or it wasn't the easiest, but I managed to move through it and make connections, and here I am. I'm doing okay, aren't I?
Exactly.
So where did you go to high school? I'm just curious. Not that I know South Africa. I know a lot of people from South Africa, but I don't know it that well. I hope to visit it at some point.
Well, Liz, I'm glad that you've met South Africans, but we are kind of like mushrooms. We do pop up everywhere. So I grew up in a relatively kind of a mid-sized town on the coast, and the whole of high school there, it was a girls' school, and actually the school turned 150 this year.
Wow.
Which is, it's sesquicentennial. Who knew that there was such a word?
Sesquicentennial.
Yeah, there you go. So I was invited back to speak as the guest speaker at Founders Day, which is quite a big deal.
Yeah.
And it was a lovely experience, Tammy. Actually, it's one of the highlights of my year. I mean, I haven't been back to high school since I finished.
Oh, really?
But
okay.
I really felt the weight of it, because I thought the records of the school go back to its founding. So at all of the Founders Days in the last 149 years, they had records of the hymns that were sung, the lunches that were served, all manner of things. And so in speaking at that Founders Day this year, I really felt the weight of the girls who were listening to me, the girls who had come from all over the world for their reunions, the teachers, the parents, and just marking life and time in a way that was far less about me and far more about the gravity of the occasion and the specialness of the occasion. So yes, that's where I grew up. very, of course, interesting life if I think about it now. I mean, South Africa was still in the system of apartheid, so it was a white, all-girls school. On one level, immensely sheltered from the realities of what was going on in South Africa. But on the other hand, immensely interesting women that came out of that school.
Oh, yeah. Huh. What an honor to be invited to give that speech.
Yes. And, I always say to people, look, when it comes to presentations or speeches, when people ask me for advice on public speaking, I say, understand that there's always going to be the three versions. So the version you plan to give, the version you actually give, and then the version you wish you'd given. So just make peace with that. And then your only job is to try to make the gap between those three versions as small as possible. But to try to wish away the three versions, well, that's asking for the impossible.
Right.
So just try to minimize that gap. And the smaller that gap is, the happier you can be.
Right.
But there will always be a gap.
Yeah.
And I have to say, out of all the speeches and presentations I've given, not just in my career, in my life, I think that was probably the one with the smallest gap. I regret not saying something about my mother, who was in the front row, but that's the only thing I wish I'd changed.
Well, I'm sure you might have had a chance to make it up to her later.
Yes, my mother did tell me it was wonderful and perfect. And I did say that was the one thing that would have made it more perfect for me. But, she's my mother. She thinks I walk on water. Oh,
that's wonderful. It's always nice when you have a parent who feels that way about you.
Yeah, I heard something the other day that said somebody was complaining about their mother. And, it was becoming quite long-winded. And eventually I looked at her and I said, listen, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. But in my case, that's not the case.
Oh, wonderful. So when you finished up at the all girls school, where did you go from there?
Well, that's where it starts to become, I think, quite interesting because I wasn't at all sure what to do, and I had no clue, in fact, and I was head girl. And I don't know what the equivalent is in the US, but, certainly it's quite a well-known concept in the UK. So we're kind of first among equals in the most senior girls, and you get elected, and it's a whole bunch of stuff. And so here I was, 17 years old, had been a hotshot all through school, but had no clue what to do next. And my father had said to me, listen, if you want to go to university, you're going to have to figure it out, because I am the first and only person in my family to have gone to university. So my dad was saying, look, you're going to have to decide what it is you want to do there. And you're going to have to pay for it, because we certainly don't have the money. And bless my parents, they tried all manner of things to try to help me figure out what can feel like an absolutely overwhelming life choice at 17.
That's huge.
It is. It's like, what subject at what university to get what career? And if I do the wrong one, well, there go all these options, which of course is not the case, but I think it's still a very prevalent and dominant narrative now. And so then fortunately it was my very clever, wise, trusting mother who said to me, well, look, you've always wanted to go overseas. At that point, I never had been. You've always wanted to go to a kibbutz. I mean, I have no Jewish heritage at all. But she said, why don't you go to a kibbutz for 6 months and spend some time figuring it out? And this was way before the concept of gap years in South Africa, at any rate, had become something that people knew about. So it was completely alien. And my mother, I think, maybe my dad as well, but my mom speaks about it more. My mother took a lot of flack from a lot of people saying, what are you thinking? You are putting her on a plane by herself to go over to Israel. And I've still got the piece of paper where my dad phoned the kibbutz, from the phone next to their bed in the bedroom, and very aware of the cost of making a phone call to Israel, saying, look, my daughter's coming as a volunteer. What must she do? Well, she must get off the plane at Tel Aviv airport. Then she must find this bus, and she must catch it to this point, and then she must catch it to that point, and then she must get another bus to another point, and at that point she must get out and she must hitchhike to the kibbutz, and then we'll see her. So this little piece of paper about this big, in my dad's very distinctive handwriting, he handed it over to me. He's like, well, that's what you must do, my girl. Good luck.
Wow.
So my poor mother, Yeah, I think I had very serious misgivings the night before. I remember coming through to the lounge and seeing her awake in the lounge. And my mother did not really smoke. I mean, maybe a few social cigarettes now and then, but she was not a smoker, but to all intents and purposes. But my mother was sitting in the lounge puffing away. And I said to her, what is going on? In the dark by herself. And she says, no, I'm thinking I must come with you to the airport tomorrow. I said, what do you mean come to the airport? Everyone is coming to the airport. My aunts and uncles had taken off work. My gran and granddad were coming. My cousins were out of school to come see me depart. And she says, no, I don't mean Port Elizabeth Airport. I mean Tel Aviv Airport. Well, she didn't do that. And I got on the plane and I got out the other side and I followed the instructions and I followed the hitchhiking instructions and I got there. And yeah, then I spent some time and eventually, cut a long story short, came back 2.5 years later, having worked in all manner of places and met all manner of people.
2.5 years you were in Israel.
Yeah.
Without coming...
2.5 years backpacking. I think in Israel, I was only there for about 3 months. I went to Egypt. I went to Greece, Turkey, the Oktoberfest, got a job there. Went to the Edinburgh Festival, got a job there, worked in London, worked in Italy because I wanted to learn Italian. So the total trip the first time was 2.5 years. And in that time, technology being very different to what it is now.
Sure.
Well, it was only 30 years ago. It was hardly 130 years ago, but still.
Yeah.
I'd make reverse charge phone calls to my parents.
Right.
I'd send letters because that was the only way I could really communicate. And came back. But in total then went back another 2 times, and it was a total of 4 years of backpacking before I actually settled in Joburg and started working.
Wow. Talk about crossing the street when you were under 2 years old. I mean, even at 17 to fly to Israel, forget about what's going on in that part of the world now.
Yeah, sure.
Even 30 years ago, I can remember quite well what it was like. I had visited Israel probably longer ago than that. It was not the most settled area of the world. And to think about, you were still a teenager, right?
Yes.
To get off a plane and hitchhike to go to a kibbutz, and you probably didn't, well, everyone speaks English there, but still, that was bold.
Yeah, I like the fact that you use the word bold, because a lot of people say, gosh, that was so brave, which I know is intended as a compliment, and so I take it as one. But, I think, as many people have said, and I agree, the real definition of courage is not the absence of fear, it's the overcoming fear. And so it was probably more bold of me. Certainly it was more bold of me than brave, because I wasn't scared. I wasn't nervous. I was just excited.
You didn't know. I mean, how could you? What would you be afraid of if no one gave you a reason to feel afraid?
Yeah. And it just felt like this big fat adventure. So off I go. I'm perfectly capable of figuring it out. And then, of course, I read a few years ago that your prefrontal cortex is only fully developed when you're 25. So you actually don't really understand risk until you're 25.
Yeah.
But then again, there are 2 definitions of risk, and that's not just me philosophizing. That's the technical definition of risk, which is that there's a risk, and we think about it and we mitigate and we ameliorate and we prevent the risk that bad things will happen, and it's real, and we need to be cognizant of that. But there is another whole category of risk, technically speaking, and that's the risk that good things will not happen.
Right.
I suppose for me, the definition of risk has always been far more weighted to the latter.
Yeah.
So, let's see what might come of things. And God forbid I don't give it a try to see what could come of things.
Yeah, I love that. I just wrote that down furiously. So 2.5 years you were away from home, sending quick little messages home, like, I'm okay, things like that, right? Reverse charges. I know my husband's family had a great little message they would use back then when, you would do a reverse charges call just to leave a message, and then they wouldn't accept the charges. And it would be, hello, Alice is fine. Alice Fine is calling, which is all is fine. Alice Fine is calling.
Oh, I love that. That's fabulous.
Oh, I'm sorry, we can't accept the charges. And then they would know he was fine.
Oh, I love that.
Isn't that great? And I'm sure there are people listening to this now who will say, what do you mean reverse the charges? What are you talking about? But 2.5 years, reflecting on that 2.5 years, and then going to all these places and working your way through all these different countries and cultures and places you just mentioned. I mean, I'm sure we could spend hours talking about stories from each of these. But I'm, in a general sense, like, how did that, I can imagine that was, in my thinking, that was more of an education than you would have ever gotten going to a university, especially not really knowing really what you wanted to do at that point. And so I'm curious, how did that 2.5 years develop you? Or I don't want to say change you, because you were, the purpose wasn't to change you. How did it evolve you?
Yeah, shape me.
Shape you, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that's the interesting question, which I have thought about every so often. How much of that backpacking was the first expression of what I was then always going to do and be, and how much of it shaped who I became and what I did. Well, that's an impossible question to answer. But I suppose there's two things that it really left me with. One was, it can sound like a glib kind of bumper sticker throwaway line, that idea that there's two kinds of people in the world: those who believe that the world is a fundamentally friendly place, and those who believe that it's not. And by no means am I stupid, am I naive, am I toxically positive, but I think I embarked on that experience, and I completed that experience even more convinced that there is far more of the good in the world than there is of the evil. And I think evil is a real thing.
Yeah.
And I relied on the kindness of strangers. I relied on serendipity. I relied on all manner of things. And sure, there were times when I was incredibly homesick and lonely and utterly broke and scared as hell. But it always worked out. And so I suppose that's the second thing is, I remember once in my first role, and this brings us to the kind of work that you do. My very first role as a professional, earning really well, going to Harvard Business School for training because the consulting company had been started up by a bunch of HBS professors, and really feeling like, wow, after I had got my degree, here I was 26 with this really impressive job. First job where, as I say, I didn't have to shower in the afternoon. I had to shower in the morning before I went to work because I wasn't doing manual labor or whatever. And I was sitting there one day after about 3 years, and 3 years is typically the average lifespan if you're coming into a consulting company, unless you decide to become a career consultant. And after about 3 years, I was starting to get restless and feeling like, gosh, I'm always the bridesmaid. I'm never the bride. I'm producing the slide deck with all of the analysis, and isn't it impressive? But I have a very strong suspicion that the doing is far harder than the analysis and the presenting. And I'd really like to get into the doing rather than stay in the consulting. And I met up with a friend of my parents who happened to be passing through Joburg, and not a particularly close friend. So why he reached out to me and why we went out for dinner, I can't even remember. It was so long ago. But it was one of those seminal conversations where he was asking me, so how's it going at work? I said, no, well, it's really, really great. But, I'm getting a bit restless. I feel like a change. And he said, well, why haven't you changed then? Look for the next thing. You're only 27. And I said, well, it's the security. So he's looking at me with the kind of screensaver expression that I only understood afterwards. The security, tell me more. And I said, well, it's the security of having money in the bank, because that's a nice change when you've lived hand to mouth. And I'd been a student. I said, the security of having a good job, of being able to put money away. And he looked at me, Geist is certainly not the expression. It's more like bemused puzzlement. And he said, security, really? He said, Niven, do you not understand that money in the bank can be taken away tomorrow? You can lose your investments. A bank can go under. A job can be taken away tomorrow. You can be retrenched. You can be fired. A company can collapse. He said, all of these things can be taken away tomorrow. He said, so if you honestly, at your age, with everything that you've done, believe that these things are security, well, then, my girl, you've lost the plot. Wow. He said, I'm not saying that these things aren't wonderful to have and aren't nice to have and aren't worth pursuing. But they are not security. If you don't understand that you are your own best security, well, then, frankly, you're window dressing on a much bigger problem. And, it was so funny, Tammy, because I looked at him and I thought, but of course you're right. How did I miss that? How did I forget that in 3 years of corporate cushiness? And I suddenly thought, no. And I was my own best security for years. I am still my own best security. And like I say, this is not to decry and deride and deny myself the pleasures of money in the bank and the opportunity to do things that money affords you.
Not at all.
It's the cherry on top if you have your own security.
Well, and it actually, this is exactly the whole point that I make all the time to people, especially in this day and age. So it's interesting that your friend was pointing this out to you, a significant amount of time going back.
Yes.
Because, I think that many of us were raised to believe that security came from external entities, that security was provided to us. Yes. And I think now we live in a time more than ever when we have to find that security from within ourselves. It doesn't mean that it still doesn't play out by having resources and, whatever that means. It could be money in the bank or assets, whatever, so that we feel like we can make choices, that involve having some financial security or an inner sense of security that we can always provide for ourselves, whatever that means. Yes. But I can understand why you overlooked that back then, because I think the sort of party line was you get a solid job, and even though you clearly already had everything it took to do that for yourself, from a very young age onward, let's say 18 months or so.
She's good. In fact, I crawled across. Let's make the story really dramatic. In fact, I was so young, I wasn't even walking.
Right. You were still crawling when you had it. But I mean, really, 17 years old, not even having a tie to Israel, being Jewish, right? Like I could see a 17-year-old kid going off to Israel, with some Jewish heritage or something, right? Hitchhiking to kibbutz. I mean, that absolutely blows my mind. And so, there was definitely sort of an inner core there that you had, but I'm sure there were lots of messages about what do you do to provide, certain things for yourself so that you don't have to worry about certain kinds of security, right?
Yeah.
So what a wonderful conversation you had with that friend.
Yes, and look, I'm immensely grateful to my parents for not hovering. In fact, the term helicopter parent, friends of ours who still got young children were at the school the other day, and the principal was speaking to all the parents, not just to our friends, and saying this idea of helicopter parent, I think it's become more about a lawnmower parent. Oh. So you're not hovering, but you are going in front of these kids and you are mowing that lawn to bowling green smoothness. So you're taking out every obstacle and every challenge that might trip these kids up. And then you look around when they're 18 or 21 and wonder why they can't take care of themselves. And I don't have kids, but I do have kids that I love dearly. And I think it's an immense challenge, one that I'm not up to, which is part of why I didn't have kids.
Yeah.
Trying to understand how you give your kids the experiences in life that give them the grit, that form their character, that form their determination. But at the same time, recognize that there are some experiences that are not going to give them grit. They're going to be cataclysmic. They're going to really upend their life. Now, how you figure that out as a parent is anyone's guess.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are people who say, yes, but the 1990s were very different. Well,
Yes.
were they? Or did we just know less then than we know now? And we kind of go down the echo chamber that we choose to go down now because there's 2 billion versions of Facebook giving us the news we are wired to want to get. So we're all stuck in confirmation bias. I don't know, but I do think that too much for kids, because we want to make life easier for them and we want to give them what we didn't have. Trust me, when I was at varsity, Tammy, I was very resentful and very envious of friends of mine whose bills were being paid.
Yes.
Who weren't having to take our student loans, who weren't having to wages. I mean, I felt very hard done by. And the reality is, if I wanted that degree, I had to get it, and I could get it. So I did get it.
And you made that
I got it on my
choice.
own. Yes, it was my choice and it was my responsibility. And so I'm immensely grateful to my parents for trusting me to figure it out and giving me the leeway to figure it out. Mm-hmm. Look, I think I was probably a fairly different kid. And so they could trust me. But there are many parents who don't trust their kids no matter what and don't give them the space to figure this stuff out themselves.
Right. And therefore, they just give them everything thinking they can't figure it out.
Yeah. And then lo and behold, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. So you mentioned university. I'm just curious, when you did decide, and it was your choice and your decision, which I think is wonderful, how did you arrive at that decision to go to university? What compelled you at that point to go?
Yes, well, actually, interestingly, I was working at the Haagen-Dazs in Leicester Square. Like I say, I had a litany of very glamorous jobs. So I was screen at Haagen-Dazs Leicester Square. It was the first Haagen-Dazs in the UK, and the manager of that store, Jonathan, couldn't have been older. 2 or 3 years older than me, so also in his early 20s. And, most of us were backpacking or traveling with students of some sort. So Jonathan had just finished his degree, and it was in geology, and had ended up getting a management position at Lloyd's Bank. So he was going to leave Haagen-Dazs and take up this management position, kind of a graduate recruitment program. And I remember looking at him when he told us this and saying, but just help me understand. I mean, you went to university and you studied rocks, and now you're going to go work in a bank. How exactly does this work?
Yeah.
And what he said really got me thinking. And he said, no, look, you've misunderstood what university is about. I said, have I? Having never been to university. He said, no, the way we look at it in the UK, and it may be the same in other places, but it certainly wasn't the way we looked at it in South Africa then or still now, I don't think. He said, the way we look at it here is the fact that you've been to university means that you have the capacity to learn. And so, yes, of course, if you're going to become a doctor or a barrister or an engineer, you need to study the discipline. Right. But for everybody else, you've got the capacity to learn. And so we will teach you. And so, yes, I can go from being a geologist to a manager. And Tammy, it was the first time anybody had ever said that to me, because it had always been up until then, what subject is school to study, what degree to get what job, as I said earlier.
Right.
And suddenly this idea that I could study what I wanted, what I thought was important and interesting, and if I did it well enough, from there, there would be many options, had never occurred to me. It was one of those few profound paradigm shifts in life.
Yeah.
And so then I thought, okay, no, I think I'm ready to go back. My brain is starting to feel like porridge. And what I'd always wanted to study was a Bachelor of Arts, but I thought, only unemployed actors or teachers study that. But I did that, and I did very well. And then consulting companies, when they were recruiting, were looking for the top achievers, and consulting companies do look from BAs to CAs with a few MBAs thrown in. So it's a wide array of disciplines that they choose from, but they want kind of top achievers. And then it started from there.
So you studied, did you have a specific major in university, or?
So it was my undergrad, well, my minors were economics, law, and French. And then my majors were English and political science.
Oh, my goodness.
So, yes.
Not just one. You had 5. You had 3 minors and 2 majors.
That's not exceptional in South Africa. That's how the system works.
Okay. It is here in the US.
Okay. And so with hindsight, what I was trying to model, but I didn't know that I was the English PPE, the politics, philosophy, and economics. And I didn't know that there was such a thing. And had I known, we didn't have that as a specific degree choice in South Africa. I would have had to model my choices to get there. But that's what I was looking for, kind of broad introductory overview to systems and thinking.
Yep. So they were recruiting on campus for the consulting companies, and you got recruited and you said, take me on.
Yeah, so I got invited to a few interviews with McKinsey and the rest, and it was just like a light bulb went on. I thought, what? These companies pay you to think through complex problems. Well, that sounds exciting. Sign me up.
And so yes, where did you go? Which company did you go with?
Well, I ended up not getting into McKinsey, which I think was actually right from a culture point of view. So then I spent another year backpacking. So that then brought the 3 years at that point to 4 years. And then my mom got very sick. And I suddenly thought, this idea that I've had, that one day when I decide to return, everyone and everything will be waiting for me. That's a big assumption. And I remember being in Manhattan. I'd taken on a nannying job in Connecticut for the summer, and being in Manhattan at the family's apartment on the Upper West Side and reading Patty Waldmeyer's Anatomy of a Miracle, which was written about the South African transition. And I suddenly thought, my mom's not going to be there forever. And the country that I care deeply about is not going to be there unless there are as many people as possible actually there helping build it. And so I thought, no, time to come back. And then I started applying at consulting firms and ended up at one called Monitor, which was superb, actually. It was the most astonishing place of astonishing people and thinking. And was there for 3 years before I had the seminal conversation about my own best security. So,
wow. And you had the experience of living in the Northeast in the U.S. too.
Yeah. Really grotty place, of course.
What's that?
Really grotty place, she says facetiously. I mean, it's anything.
Grotty.
Grotty, as in grim and ugly.
Oh, okay. We'll have to have another conversation about that. But anyway, so take us forward from there, because I know you had that seminal conversation, and curious where you went from the consulting. Where
Well, then I started up the first of a few businesses that I had, and this one was called Spanner and Wench. So I played on words of spanner and wrench. And I thought, no, you know what? I think women should know about their cars because we are all getting completely ripped off about them. I'm going to start up a business that teaches women about their cars. And then I'm going to speak to the banks to say it's in your interest and in the interest of this asset that women know how to take care of it, because until this car is paid off, it's actually your asset. So why don't we offer these courses to women through the banks? And I got a lot of quizzical looks and kind of wry smiles and a lot of no's. But I did spend a few months teaching women about their cars and how to change a tire and all manner of things. It was actually hilarious and ridiculous, but some. And while I was doing this and working with a range of the banks, one of the banks that I was working with sponsored the Businesswomen's Association, which at the time was the biggest association, most influential association of business and professional women in the country. And they were looking for a CEO. And I don't know what it was in the board and in the bank and in the sponsors that made them look at me as this 29-year-old who really did not know much about much and think, actually, she'd be a great CEO. I mean, I think I had a lot of energy. I had a lot of opinions. I thought strategically about how this business association could be more than a women's club, which is pretty much what it was at the time. And so they hired me as CEO, and off I went. And yeah, like I say, even I would not have hired me at the beginning, but they did. And 3 years later, I think I'd done a really good job and thought, no, look, it's time to move on, because I felt like I was becoming very typecast. People thought about the association, they thought about me because I'd built up a big profile nationally. I'd built up a big profile for the BWA. And so we were becoming pretty inextricably linked. And I thought, no, there's more to this association than me as the CEO, as much as I'm the figurehead. And there's certainly more to me than this association. So time to do something different. And so then I started looking around.
And well, then I became CEO of NOAA, which was a children's NGO. At the time, HIV/AIDS was running absolutely rampant through sub-Saharan Africa. It really was an utterly awful time. And one of the members of the BWA had been a founding member of NOAA. So we looked after about 30,000 children a day. Wow.
In rural KwaZulu-Natal, which is one of the provinces in South Africa, and rural Gauteng, also one of the provinces, and worked with communities to help orphaned and vulnerable kids and child-headed households. So, I mean, we were sitting in the most unspeakable situation of having teenagers raise their siblings.
Wow.
In utterly, utterly dire circumstances, houses with no running water, no electricity in deep rural areas. And so NOAA was about mobilizing communities, working with them to help these kids get the government grants that they were entitled to, help them get the psychosocial support that they were entitled to and needed, helping them stay in school, helping them with food. And on the face of it, a lot of people were very puzzled, certainly a lot of the business journalists in South Africa who said, but you go to the opening of Parliament and you go to the annual budget speech and you're sitting with the top women in the country. And now you're doing this. We don't quite understand the change. And I said, well, yes, at a superficial level, it does seem quite odd. But if you look at the more profound values level, I'm still doing what I've always done and will always want to do, which is working with people who give a damn about something that really matters and who are wholly committed to doing it. Yeah. And so these are not women who are CEOs and of listed companies. These are rural grandmothers, many of whom are not educated, many of whom don't speak English, and I don't speak Zulu. But we care about doing something that matters, and so we're doing that. Mm-hmm. And I think certainly in terms of an education about what it means to be South African and what it means to understand more fully the parallel universes of this country, that was the biggest education I could have gotten, because, we are the most unequal society in the world. So South Africa and Brazil vie for the dubious distinction of having the highest Gini coefficient in the world. So I speak about, we are not a country of haves and have-nots. We're a country of haves, have-nots, and have-yachts. We have immense wealth in this country and immense poverty as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's talk about walking your talk, right? Yeah,
and I think I remember driving back once from an ARC, that's what we called our centers in rural KwaZulu-Natal. It's probably about 800 kilometers from Johannesburg, so it was about 8.5, 9 hours drive. And it was almost every hour I felt like I was coming closer to the 21st century and to a modern Western city. Mm-hmm. So the ARC that I'd been to see and the area that I was in was, like I say, very deeply rural. And there was a teacher's strike on at the time. So kids weren't allowed access to school. And I was hitting the roof because the kids, by not being allowed access to school, were not getting access to food. So our feeding schemes weren't allowed to operate. And the teachers who were calling the strike, their kids were in schools that weren't striking. So I was just so impotent with rage, saying the hypocrisy of this, that you will deprive other people's kids, not just of school, but of food while your kids are being educated. And then honestly, about 8.5 hours when I drove into my suburb, past the girls' school that is just down the road from my home, it was moms in the 4x4 Mercedes and Audis and BMWs picking up girls to go to afternoon hockey and drama and ballet and go to the very upmarket supermarket to get food that night for dinner. And I just sat there and I thought 8.5 hours away is a parallel universe. And like I say, every hour on the hour, there's more. And by the time I got back to Joburg, just like, what? Teacher strike? What are you talking about?
Yeah. It's amazing how two completely different worlds can exist just hours apart in the same country, right?
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, parallel universes even in the city. I mean, next to a mall that sells Louis Vuitton and Gucci and Ferragamo shoes are people living with no running water and electricity as well.
Right. So that left you, as you said, impotent with rage.
Yes.
What did you do with that, and where did you go from there?
Well, actually, interesting that you pick up on that, because I only lasted at NOVA for about 2 years before I thought, look, I'm this close to a complete burnout.
Yeah.
And if I burn out, it'll be metaphorically like I'm falling over a cliff, and it'll take a long time to put the pieces of myself back together again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to need to take a step back. And it was interesting how long it took me to get to that realization, because I spent probably about 6 months, Tammy, telling myself, who are you? How dare you tell yourself or tell the world that this is too difficult? You're in your 30s. You've got plenty of resources. This is a job. You're getting paid to do the job. You're not living this life. So how dare you? Who do you think you are?
Wow.
It was amazing. The one day, and I don't know what changed. Maybe it had just all gotten too much. The one day I just suddenly thought, okay, well, maybe if I give myself permission to feel what I'm feeling, then I can do something about it. And it was interesting because I remember reading something once after the September 11th Commission of Inquiry, where people were talking there about how a lot of the agencies in the US, rather than look at the systemic failures, had adopted a strategy of deny, decry, and delay.
Mm-hmm.
But deny, decry, delay. How interesting. Because I'd adopted that as a coping strategy. I denied that I was overwhelmed. When I then admitted it, I decried my right to feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I delayed any kind of solution until one day I just said, well, okay, you know what? This is what I'm feeling. This is what I am feeling. What am I going to do about it? And and then basically I took a year off, actually.
You took a year.
I just did nothing except read, which can sound immensely self-indulgent. It wasn't particularly helpful from a financial or investment point of view, but it was the only thing I thought I could do. Mm-hmm. I actually just needed to do it. And actually it wasn't a year. It was probably about 9 or 10 months. But when my partner came back and saw me watching YouTube videos on how to fold a fitted sheet, Yvette said, I think it's time for you to go back to work. I think you're fine now. And I was. So I did.
Oh my goodness. I love that. That would be a great metaphor for a lot of things. It's like when you reach that point where you're watching videos of how to fold a fitted sheet, it's time to look somewhere else.
And then you're ready to look somewhere else. Although I must say, being able to fold a fitted sheet is still a great life skill.
Oh, it's absolutely, it's very satisfying, but then you really do have to move on from that. So speaking of moving on, you're still in your 30s and you've been through the corporate world. You've been a consultant, you've been in banking, you've been, you've touched the banking world and you've touched, the nonprofit, development world in deep ways. I mean, it's like there's nothing you've done so far that you didn't hit the surface of anything. So what did you do after that? Let's call it sabbatical.
Well, then I went to the central bank. So, our equivalent of the Federal Reserve. And that was because the incoming governor had known me through the Businesswomen's Association. It was just after the global financial crisis, and she knew, like all central bank governors knew, that, look, that crisis happened because of a failure of conduct, and a failure of conduct is a failure of culture. And so commercial banks had to really start looking at the culture of their organizations quite seriously. But so, frankly, too did central banks. And they really needed to understand the world differently and be understood in the world differently. It was Alan Greenspan who said, quite famously, or maybe infamously, if you understand what the central bank does or the Federal Reserve does, then we're not doing our job. We are meant to be opaque. You are meant to infer our decisions from market movements. We're not going to be transparent. And that had to change. That has changed. And so she brought me in there to work in the strategy department. And then I had a number of roles in the central bank, culminating in heading up a department, which was essentially all around the learning and development, leadership learning and development, technical learning and development in the bank. And I was there for 5 years, which was longer than I'd ever been. There. And then from there, went to Standard Bank, which you mentioned. So heading up leadership and culture across about, I think at the time it was about 50,000 employees across, again, at the time, I think it was about 22 countries.
Oh, wow. I'm curious about the decision. You took this, I'm calling it a sabbatical. You took this time off, you were reading, you were learning about folding sheets. And what made you decide to, I don't know if you must have been keeping in touch with some people you knew through the Businesswomen's Association.
Yeah.
So the move towards a banking environment, was that because it was something you were interested in, or the familiarity of it? How did you land back in that environment?
Yeah, so I suppose there's two answers to your question. I think the first is that giving myself permission to take the sabbatical. And actually, I wrote about it on LinkedIn just the other day. I'm reading this book called Uncertain, which is all about the wisdom in not knowing when we're so desperate and determined to be sure. And there's a great quote from a Stanford neuroscientist where he says, from a brain activity point of view, so this is literal, but it's also metaphorical, a pause is not a time when nothing happens.
That's right. Yeah.
I thought, is that not the truth? And so one of my board members, when I said, look, I'm going to need to take a pause, and I was really concerned that my board, who I really respected, would look at me and say, shame, you can't cut it. It was the CEO of the JSE, CEO of many impressive companies in the country. And even had they thought that, I would have still done it, but I would have been saddened by their lesser opinion of me. And one of our board members just looked at me and said, Niven, we've all been where you are. We've all had that feeling. The only difference between you and us is you're actually going to do something about it.
Yeah.
And so I think that permission to give yourself a time to pause and to know that in the pause, it's not a space where nothing happens.
That's right.
Geez, that is important. Yeah. And then recognizing, okay, I'm now at the end of the pause has served its function. Then the governor, I think, that's how it worked. Yes. She had been announced as governor and I reached out to her to congratulate her. And that started a conversation, which then to me, having to be very rigorously vetted for the bank, because she was adamant this was going to be all above board and due process. And in fact, due process to squared, given the amount of interviews I went through. But it went from there, basically.
And then, so then you were there 5 years, then you went on to Standard Bank, heading up learning and development.
Well, leadership and culture.
Oh, leadership and culture. I'm sorry. Love that. And take us forward.
Yeah. And then, look, I loved working in a large corporate, but a number of things happened, including getting breast cancer. And even as I've been very conscious and intentional about my life, I think there is something about a crucible experience. And, we all have crucible experiences in our life, but there was something about that focused my mind yet again, and even more intensely than it's ever been focused before.
Yeah.
And I could culminate it in a couple of things, but ultimately it got to the point where I thought, look, I don't ever want to fill in a leave form ever again. So I'm not going to. Mm-hmm. And so 7 years ago, I thought, look, what I really want to do with my career and my life is to be working until I'm in my 80s. Mm-hmm. And ideally not because I have to, because that's the only way I can keep the lights on. I mean, that's not great.
Right.
But because I want to, and because I'm in demand, and because I just get better and better at what I do, and more skilled and valuable in how I do what I do. Mm-hmm. And I really can't think of anything worse than sitting on a porch and watching the sunset every night, wondering what am I going to do? I love to do that. And so I certainly do that, but I do that now already. I do that as part of what I do. Right. I'm not waiting for retirement to start living my life. Right. I travel now. I do the things I enjoy now. And in between that, I do the work that I want to do. Yeah. And that's a recipe for life that, frankly, I want to continue for as long as possible. I mean, my gynecologist, God bless her, died 2 years ago. She was 84, and she delivered her last baby the week before she died.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, isn't that wonderful?
It is. Absolutely. Totally.
Isn't that an interesting way to be in the life?
Couldn't agree with you more. I was just, we recently lost, the actress Maggie Smith, and I was applauding her and her life and her trajectory. And it has to be right for you. Not everybody wants to, work up until their last breath. But I don't see work and life as being so distinctly separate. I think it depends where you derive your joy and all that. So it's not that it's right for everyone. So you've taken us on this amazing journey, and tell us about what you're doing today, how the last 7 years have gone. I hope your health is good, and you look healthy to me.
I am healthy, thank you.
And tell us about what you're doing today and all that you've done, because now you're fully in your own shop, so to speak.
Yes. And it's that lovely Oprah Winfrey quote, I hope when you back yourself, you decide to double down. I mean, I think I did double down, and that's been wonderful. So essentially what I do now is at a broad level, I say I'm a consultant and an advisor, and my work really is in three big buckets of areas. The one is I actually love teaching. I love standing in front of a group of people, be they executives or graduates or delegates on a leadership program. And I love teaching and talking and getting people to think. And that idea from Plato that the mind is, it's 2000 years old, but it's still true, that the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but it's a fire to be lit.
I love that.
That's so true. Especially now when we live in an age of Google.
Yeah.
I always talk about that learning framework of the what, the so what, the now what.
Yeah.
And what is the content? And, content matters, and it's useful to distinguish some of the signal from the noise of information overload that is out there. But for me, I can share that, but the real value is in the so what and the now what. And the so what is about meaning. What does this mean to me? Mm-hmm. As a person, as a manager, as a leader, as a whatever. And now what am I going to do about that? So a lot of my teaching around office politics, around leadership, around storytelling is around that. Then the second big chunk, which is kind of a Venn diagram overlap, is working with executive teams and saying, I'm not a coach because I don't want to be one, but I can certainly mentor you and get you to think about how you guys are showing up. Mm-hmm. Because, as leaders, we get what we demonstrate and we get what we tolerate.
Right.
And we probably also get what we celebrate. So what are you demonstrating? What are you tolerating? What are you celebrating? And I'm going to hold up a mirror and I'm going to help you. And I'm going to help you with tough empathy, because I know what it's like to be a leader. Yeah. But there's also obligation in being a leader. So you can't escape that obligation. Mm-hmm. And then the third big area is a lot around the research that I'm doing for my PhD, which will pretty much form the basis for my second book around are politics different for women. And I agree with you, Tammy, spoiler alert, they are. But, my anecdata and opinions are one thing. Rigorous research in a PhD is a different thing.
Yes. No, I agree with that. And so speaking of your love of teaching and teaching in a number of ways, right? You do keynotes, you do workshops, and I know that you've been also. I know you travel all over, and you've really been wanting to spread out more into the U.S. and doing more here. We're saying that intentionally because we hope that somebody listening to this might invite you. I know that in November 2024, you'll be in Chicago doing some things, and that you'd be happy to be invited back.
Thank you, Tammy. I would be. Yes.
Yeah, no, I can see it, and I can see you also speaking in front of quite a variety of audiences as well. Given the range of things that you can speak about. And you're doing this research and also doing a lot of writing at the same time. Harvard Business Review, people can look at your work that way. Is there anything else that we should be looking at here before we finish up today?
No, I think your lovely amplification of my intention and hope to do more work in the US was lovely. No, I think that's probably it. Although no, maybe on second thoughts, I was speaking to somebody just this week who reached out to me on LinkedIn, and she was saying how she thought it was just her company and just the women in her company that were taking particular strain. And I said, well, the good news is the bad news is the tragic news is that I think people around the world are taking immense strain. And I think women even more so. But I think this is a global challenge at a time of all kinds of collapse, where we economically, politically, socially, environmentally, it's that beautiful quote, but also quite scary quote, the old is dying, but the new has yet to be born. We're really wrestling with the collapse of many ways of thinking about the world and many systems in the world. And so what I do in the work that I do is really about helping people, helping teams, helping leaders create islands of sanity. And that's not my phrase, it's a Margaret Wheatley phrase, but isn't she a wise and wonderful woman? Islands of sanity, because there's a great New Yorker cartoon that I loved from a few years ago. Two people are walking along a pavement and the one turns to the other and says, my desire to be well informed is currently at odds with my desire to remain sane.
Oh my goodness. If you have a copy of that cartoon, will you please send that to me?
I will. And I thought, isn't that the truth? And so I think this paradox, this tension between knowing what we need to know, knowing what's important, but also knowing that there's an opportunity and, again, an obligation to build an island of sanity for ourselves, for our teams, for the people that we care about.
Yes.
And when we do that, quite how much more grateful we can become in life. And I was saying this to somebody just the other day. We're not grateful because we're happy. We are happy because we are grateful. And again, that's not toxic positivity. Do me a favor. I've got no time for that.
I agree.
But in this time of collapse and overwhelm, to find those islands, to build them, and to be deeply grateful for what we get to do on them and from them with other people that we also get to be deeply grateful for. I think this is no small thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm also brought back to is that dinner you had with that family friend who wasn't even a close friend, who left you with that who really pulled from you something you already had, was that you're your own best security. And I think that is, you're your own best sanity too.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that.
Well, I think it ties right in, right? I mean, how do you feel secure within yourself? You've got to find that. I don't even want to use the word balance because that just makes me way overused and it doesn't mean anything. But you've got to find that sort of point of sanity within yourself, and then hopefully find ways to share that, or bring that to others. I think when you talked about, how are you showing up? It's not just as a team, it's as a leader with others. And that doesn't mean that you have to lead others or be in a position of authority to do so, right? So we could go on and on and on here. What is the best way for people to learn more about you and your work? We're going to put a ton of links and things in the show notes, but what would be the one place that you'd want people to look first to find you?
Probably either my website, which is nivenpostma.com, or on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn and very reactive on LinkedIn if people reach out to me there. Excellent.
Okay, good. People will know that. And let's wrap up with one question. And that is, as you know, work from the inside out. We like to think about those people who are still trying to decide what their next move is or how to navigate their way there. What would be a key piece of advice you might give someone who is on that part of their journey?
I suppose I'll pay it forward with a piece of advice that I got as well when I started up a business. And before I did it, I was speaking to a colleague of mine and he was going out on his own. And I was saying, gosh, aren't you a bit nervous about doing your own thing? And I'm not saying doing your own thing is the answer for everybody, not at all.
No.
We all can find fulfillment in all kinds of ways. And when people tell me that a corporate is where you sell your soul, I just think that's lazy. You can find meaning and purpose and contribution anywhere.
Absolutely.
So as a salaried employee, as an entrepreneur in NGOs and corporates, whatever, or conversely, you can find it nowhere. But he was starting a business and I said, gosh, aren't you nervous that it'll fail? And he said, what I suppose many of us have heard. It was like, no, but for me, the real failure is not even trying.
Yes.
And I thought, I think that's right. And I build on it now by saying this idea that we shouldn't be scared of failure. Well, that's impossible. We're all going to be scared of failure.
Yeah.
But maybe the only thing that jolts us out of the inaction that a fear of failure brings is if we are terrified of regret.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that idea that we regret what we don't do, I think is important, that we didn't try.
Right. And
you don't have to speak to hospice nurses to know that this is what they hear all the time.
Right.
But it is what they hear all the time.
Right. Well, I love that. That's a great note to say thank you for sharing your journey and your story. I look forward to seeing where it goes next and your next book and all the work that you're doing. I wish you all the best on your PhD journey. And I look forward to being in touch. So thank you for being here today on Work from the Inside Out.
Oh, thank you for the lovely invitation and the really lovely conversation.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of my interview with Niven Postma. What is your key takeaway from our conversation? If you are interested in any of the resources mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them in the show notes on my website at tammygoularloeb.com/podcast. Just look for episode 264. And while you're there, you can also subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes. If you're feeling it, please help me to inspire more people to grow their careers by writing an honest rating and brief review on Apple Podcasts. There's a button provided right there on my website. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my award-winning book, Work from the Inside Out, Break Through 9 Common Obstacles and Design a Career That Fulfills You. It's available through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, or through your local library. And you can also help sustain this podcast by buying me a cup of coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TammyGL. Since this podcast is self-funded, your support is acknowledged and appreciated. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.